Thank you for joining in. Today we have an established and exemplary speaker, Marshall Gunter, who's leading several technologies in Nexalogy. And I've had the pleasure to work with Zach Devereaux at Nexalogy on several studies looking at NATO's military exercises, and I believe 2 years ago, Canadian federal elections and so on. So it's a pleasure to have Marshall to speak with us. Before we get started, I also like to make some announcements. We have our Social Computing Annual Conference coming up next month. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the conference, I know some of you have in fact attended the conference the last years. Please feel free to take a look at the conference. I will post a link on our chat window. And we have several interesting tracks there. We have some challenge tracks for disinformation and a specific parallel data challenge. So if you're working on some of the problems of disinformation, COVID-19 disinformation or parallel data sets, then feel free to take a look at the challenge. The regular track papers have been submitted, reviewed, and accepted. So the program and the conference agenda will be made online very soon. If you haven't registered for the conference, take a look at the registration page. I think we are still within the window of early registration. So if you're interested in attending the conference and looking at the data challenge, feel free to do that. We have several other interesting tracks for your students. So if you're interested in sending your students, we have a doctoral consortium going on, and early or late breaking papers. So take a look at the conference website, and perhaps you will find something interesting there to submit your studies or emerging studies from your group. Um, and let's see if we have anyone new that has joined the call today and haven't had a chance to introduce in the past sessions. We can open the floor for quick introductions. Marshall, I know you're probably joining this first time, and I will take the moment to introduce you. But if there is anyone else who hasn't introduced themselves before, please feel free to introduce.
Yeah, so hi, this is Maria. I'm a research scientist with the security group, and I was curious to join the call and learn more about social media and threat intelligence. I have recently started working in this area, and I would love to know more.
Nice to have you, Maria. Um, the good thing about the group is that all the presentations are made available online through YouTube channel. So Chris has been tremendous in doing those things. We can share the link if you would like to browse our previous or earlier presentations. For all those where we have the speaker consent, we do record and upload this on the South Data Hub YouTube channel. And I believe today we have Marshall's consent. We are going to upload that. Is that correct, Marshall?
That's correct. Feel free.
Thank you. Um, all right. Anyone else who hasn't had a chance to introduce?
Sure. Hello, I'm Mainuddin Sheikh. I'm a PhD student in ULR. I worked under Dr. Agarwal at Cosmos Lab. I work on social media as well, and I'm joining this meeting to learn more, to know what kind of social media projects you guys work on, to know more about it.
Thank you, Sheikh, for joining in.
Thank you, sir.
John, it's good to see you. I think we have met at Credco meetings last year, or maybe the year before. Last year is still a haze.
Yeah. Hey, Nitin.
Good to have you
nice
here.
To see you. Yeah, thanks. The topic caught my attention, so I'm looking forward to hearing what Marshall has to say. Thanks.
Awesome. Good to have you here. All right. I think there is no one else, or we haven't missed anyone on the call. So let me briefly introduce Marshall. And again, it's a pleasure to have Marshall here. Marshall works at Nexalogy, And he's responsible for the engineering teams and architecture that power Nexalogy's advanced artificial intelligence tools. With over a decade of executive engineering leadership experience, Marshall has led engineering teams, both large and small, to drive and build great ideas into successful products. Marshall's engineering background is rooted in big data analysis. He has personally architected systems for both breadth and depth of data ingestion and throughput, processing billions with a B, billions of data points a day across hundreds of terabytes of footprint. Yeah, we need to take some tips from you, Marshall. We are struggling with all those type of capabilities. So I will be very keenly listening to your talk. Marshall will ensure the Nexalogy engineering department will continue to deliver the high quality AI products demanded by Nexalogy's clients. So again, it's a pleasure to have you, Marshall, to speak at the working group. The floor is yours. I would mute myself and also request everyone else on the call to please mute. If you have questions, please use the chat. And once the talk is over, then we will take the questions from the chat and also live.
Certainly. Hello, everybody. I'm Marshall Gunter. As he said, I'm the CEO of Nexalogy. Nexalogy is a fully owned subsidiary of Datametrics AI Limited. I'm also the CEO of the parent company, Datametrics. So a lot of the papers and some of the other things I refer to during this time will be hosted on Datametrics' website. I'm putting a link in the chat now if you want to go up there. So today we're going to focus on a particular technology that Nexalogy offers called NexaSMART and what we do with it. And I'm going to give an overview of the product and some of the use cases it's been used for over the years. And then I'm going to, time permitting, give you a short walkthrough of a problem set we worked on not too long ago so you can see exactly how an analyst would use the technology. So as a brief background, Nexalogy has been around for about a decade. For the past 6 or so years, we've been developing technology in conjunction with the DRDC, which is defense research in Canada, along with the Canadian Armed Forces, the US Armed Forces, and NATO. Additionally, we work in the private sector with companies like Lotte Corporation, which is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate out of Korea, Samsung Group, I'm sure everybody knows Samsung, Ford Motors, various others. But today I'm going to focus on the cybersecurity aspects of this. If you have questions around what is being done in the private sector with this tech, or some different applications of the tech that's not shown here in the private sector, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my coordinates in the chat. So as a quick overview, Datametrics and Nexalogy, we have offices in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. We're headquartered, we're incorporated in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We also have an office in Seoul, South Korea. So let's get started. So this is NexaSMART. So the problem we're attacking here is cybersecurity. So there's more bots, cyborgs, disinformation than ever. So how do you locate and counter threats before they get to you? And this, what we're discussing here, we work with social media, any type of mass media, enterprise data such as email. We took apart WikiLeaks for NATO and the Canadian government. Basically anything with the text, a timestamp, and something we can attribute to an author, and we can work on it. So the tool and the solution we have is called NexaSMART. It's an OSINT platform. It stands for Open Source Intelligence, which analyzes massive amounts of data to empower investigative professionals to focus just on the tradecraft while automating away, busy work. And we do this through scientifically validated methods. And the idea is to shorten the time to insight. So how do you get to actionable intelligence faster? And like I said, this has been built in conjunction with the Canadian government and defense research. We've been deployed in the field for the past 5 years. We build a lot of this on top of, the latest AI methods, deep learning, NLP, big data analysis, a lot of statistical analysis. And the idea is to manifest threats before they get to, before they become a threat. So here it is. You take your data, you apply these different algorithms in some degree. So machine learning, NLP, entity extraction, trending analysis, cluster classification, information extraction, network and graph analysis, topic and text summarization, and automated reporting. And that's what gives you NexaSMART. Now, this is what sets us apart. We're actually we're a discovery tool. We don't just do monitoring. Monitoring is part of the package, but what we mean by discovery is, I mean, Donald Rumsfeld used to talk about this in the Bush administration, and he would talk about turning unknown unknowns into known knowns. That's what we do. We can show you what's going to bite you, down the road, what's coming in 2 days, what's going to hit you in a week, what you need to be looking at now in order to be ready for then. Here's some examples. Narrative shaping. We were deployed with NATO in Operation Trident Juncture. This was 2018. Some of these examples, I can't show you everything because it's classified, but I will show you what we're allowed to. And stop me if you have any questions. Trident Juncture. So this was the largest NATO joint forces operation since the Cold War. There were years of planning that went into this. And it was set to take place, in the North Atlantic, in the North Sea, and through the Scandinavian countries. And a year into logistics for this, NATO started to get cold feet. If you remember, about 4 years before this, Russia had stormed Crimea, and then there was still some lingering tension there, and something started flaring up on the Russian border about the time they were getting ready to start the logistics for this. So about 6 months before the operation. So NATO called us in, along with a few others, to start looking at the online narrative and to do the narrative shaping. Basically, NATO wanted to ensure that they didn't get a lot of disinformation in there from the Russian counterparts, i.e. when they moved in thousands and thousands of tanks and planes and soldiers and boats and everything else, they didn't want it to be seen as, a prelude to war. And when NATO spoke in the media, that their message was getting out and not some disinformation network. And so we went out and we started helping them with this 6 months before the operation started. It was a success. What you can see here, whoops, we'll get to it in just a second. So we start off with like lexical analysis. This is some proprietary algorithms we use to start surfacing unknown unknowns and other things that are trending in media and social media. So this is at the beginning of the exercise. You can see the clusters start bringing, when we start clustering social media posts or, media articles and stuff, we can tell what's going to start surfacing shortly. And this is one of the tools we do it. You can see that the computer, the algorithms color code different things that the analyst should be paying attention to. Like this is getting ready to start trending. You should be looking at it. We'll see some more of this later. But we were successful with this, as you can see by the actor interaction graph. This is the social media graph around the discussion of Operation Trident Juncture. And that big green dot in the middle, that's NATO. So that when you see a graph in this shape, it means that NATO's really controlling the message here. So when they speak, their message is going out. It's not being disjointed and fractured by disinformation networks. There was a bit of that you can see in the lower right, but not much at all. So they were successful by and large in controlling their message. So when NATO, they became the most relevant influencer inside the discussion. Now, everything went completely well up until the very last day, and we'll get to that in a minute. So that leads us to another thing that we do, crisis management. So think black swan events, stuff you can't predict. So at the very last minute, on the last day, the Helge Ingstad, which is a Norwegian frigate, ran into a Greek oil tanker. And so this sent all the disinformation networks flying into operation. As you can see on the left, I mean, Sputnik News was on top of it, and almost immediately. So they marshaled us up to start looking at what's going on and how do we get a response to this. And you can see here from this particular timeline the uptick in And this, I believe this one's from Twitter. Yeah, number of tweets. So yeah, that's the uptick in Twitter around the NATO event at that time. Some of our tooling allows us to go in and ingest thousands and thousands of articles and bring out the relevant entities in the conversation. So like the relevant people, locations, religious affiliations, works of art, stuff like that. And then the computer can also produce a summary of what's going on, so that an analyst, doesn't have the time to read the hundreds of thousands of posts or, media documents that are going on at the time. They can rely on, our tooling to get a handle on the situation and get this type of information into the hands of decision makers in minutes and not hours. So we're going to see that here. This is part of the summarization engine on the right. This was an early beta of it. This is now in full-fledged in the product. But one of the most interesting things that came out of this is the computer picked up on this before anybody else did. Any intelligence network, nobody. It came out of here first. And you'll see we've highlighted it in the lower right. The AI was saying there's disruptions to GPS signals. And when we dug into this, the reason it started telling us this is because people online were complaining that like their Google Maps quit working and, they couldn't get a signal on their TomTom. And so the computer's like, there's GPS disruption. Well, it turns out the Russians were actually jamming one GPS band, and it also resulted in a whole bunch of planes having to land. And, they never said this was what resulted in that shipwreck, but it's an awful big coincidence. So again, here's an example of an unknown becoming a known. And this is like we say, we're more of a discovery engine as opposed to just monitoring. So we bring forth this information. Additionally, we do like event monitoring. So if you need help with your event or, something physically happening in the real world, this was Canada Day. This is the 150th anniversary of Canada. And that's Parliament Hill you see there for those who've never been here in Ottawa. It was a big deal. The Prime Minister was going to speak, U2, Bono, the band and everything was going to play on that stage. And the problem was the RCMP, which is Canada's federal police force, it's the equivalent of the US FBI, came to us and said, look, we cannot monitor all the existential threats on social media surrounding this. It's too big of a task. What do we do? So we set to work with devising a plan, because our tech allows us to geo-target around watching, for threat vectors coming in on social media. And they were able to successfully do this with our tooling with just 2 officers. And this was a big deal because just 30 days before this, one of the guards on Capitol Hill got stabbed and killed. So they were really, really serious about security. Again, you may not have seen this one. This was Canadian, but this was the Saudi Canadian OSINT threat. So what happened was one of our MPs, that means members of parliament, she set off on social media disparaging the Saudi government for their treatment of women. And so the Saudi government started firing back, and this evolved into a flame war online. So of course, intelligence gets involved. And what happened was this tweet came out, and this is on a verified Saudi account. And it's basically a 9/11 style attack warning against Toronto. That's the CN Tower in Toronto, for those of you unfamiliar with it. And you've obviously got a plane getting ready to fly into it. And you can see the Arabic saying there, he who interferes with what doesn't concern him finds what doesn't please him. So they said that they came to us and said, okay, get on it. So this brings, we brought out one of our other pieces. We do propaganda filtering, so we can filter out propaganda or focus on the propaganda in our propaganda detectors. So we started on this, and one of the interesting things we found, and here's an example of predictive OSINT. And again, of surfacing things, the unknown unknowns. As we were examining this, we found something trending under the hood that was called A-core sycamore. And when we dug into A-core sycamore, it was some conspiracy theory being spread online that this was a prelude to an invasion, an attempt to conquer Canada by like the Saudis and the United States. So we turned that over to intelligence. I don't know what they did with it, but it was awful interesting. Again, some other things we do: situational awareness. This is us in the lower right. This is Q. If anybody's familiar with the event, we go to this every year. This is Contested Urban Environments. This is a Five Eyes event. The Five Eyes nations are Britain, US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It's an intelligence sharing agreement. But Q, what they do is they go in and they drop troops into contested environments and drones and all kinds of other stuff, and run them through. And then they monitor the populace to see how they react. And they use this to produce battle plans for when they actually have to do it. So you can see the soldiers running around, that long thing sticking out under his arm. It looks like some sort of rifle when you see it, but it's actually a camera, so they can take pictures while they're down there. That's us in the lower right. He talked about Zach. Zach's the guy in the red shirt right there, along with some intelligence analysts there. So yeah, we can monitor for baselines and see if something, goes out of baseline, and you should be looking into it as far as events on the ground and situational awareness are concerned. We've done force protection. So we monitored here. This is us being deployed in MINUSMA, which was a operation in Mali led by the UN. And we were there to monitor for troops on the ground while they were moving in. Again, a lot more situational awareness. What are people doing as the troops are moving in on the ground? How are the populace reacting? What are they saying? What's the news saying online? And a lot of this led to the UN uncovering, the Malayan army committing atrocities against civilians and not being able to hold a fair election and stuff. And that allowed the UN to properly investigate that and to quash it. We do radicalization targeting. This was some research that we were asked to do, understanding Al-Britani and Al-Kanadi online social media efforts. You can see here that we uncovered some guys called Muslim Sniper. These were investigated, yes, so to speak. So yeah, we can go online and track radicalization as it spreads, or any other message for that matter as it spreads. And we'll see some of that later when we're combating disinformation and fake news, but it's the same thing. If you can track one piece of news and how it morphs, you can track another. So we do a lot of, radicalization targeting online and seeing how terrorism spreads around the globe through online social media efforts. So protecting and predicting. We were involved in building tech and then operating tech to help understand the impact of foreign actor influence in our elections. We started in the 2019 Canadian elections, and then we were used in the 2020 US elections to track disinformation and its spread online and assess the impacts it had on the vote and on democracy in Canada and democracy in the United States. There is a co-branded NATO paper. There is a co-branded NATO paper on this on the Datametrics website, so please feel free to pull it down. It is a bit redacted because there's some of it that was not allowed to be published, but you can get an idea of what we're doing in there. So the question is, are these applications of existing methods, or have you developed new methods of analysis? It's a bit of both. So we have new methods of analysis, particularly in the disinformation area and especially in the summarization and entity extraction areas. And we're constantly working on new methods of analysis. But like I said, this has been going on we've been in the field for 5 or 6 years now. So we build upon the old methods and we do create new methods. And we're constantly updating some of this stuff because the way information flows and how it's framed are constantly being updated. Like, it was one thing to detect bots 10 years ago. It's quite another now. And again, this is work we were doing for the administration, well, the previous and the current U.S. administrations around COVID-19 disinformation. Again, there's another published paper on this one on the website. You can see that it was co-branded with, I forget which U.S. agencies co-branded this paper, but you can see it in there. But it is talking and mapping Chinese disinformation about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, see the paper. Some of it's redacted again, but it's interesting, especially for professionals. And so we tracked a lot of hate speech, and we're able to track these down sometimes all the way to the, the person of origin. So here it is, NexaSMART. And one of the more interesting things about this in our tech is you can automate all this. So instead of having to go back and look at things all the time, you can set up an automated report. You can set up triggers, and you can tell it, report every so often, or you can tell it to report on your triggers, updates of, certain words or increase in activity. There's all kinds of different triggers you can think of. And these reports can be automated. And this is you asked about new methods. It's not an analysis method, but this is a huge time saver for everybody who uses the tooling now, is they don't have to go back and look every now and then. They can just get this sent to their email or to their smartphone. And, it pushes the information to you. You don't have to pull it out. So that's what SMART stands for, Social Media Automated Reporting Technology. And that's it. Nexa Security, our aim is to aid any Intel team and shorten the amount of time and human resources it takes to garner actionable intelligence and turn that into insights that, then decision makers can use to, make more informed decisions. Thank you. You can, there's questions you can send in later, but that's the high level overview of some of the stuff we do. Now I'd like to take about 10 minutes and show you like how the tool is used. So I think you guys would, let me stop sharing this screen. Let me go back, okay, we'll go here. And whoops, where'd the screen share go? Oh, there it is. So share screen, let's share that screen. Okay, can we see this new one, big and purple?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this is how it's actually done. Not just, the bullet points. So this is a bit of an overview. We've went over this. But again, we reduce your time to insight. You discover what you don't know, identify disinformation, highlight who or what, eliminate time wasting. So ours is a human in the loop tool, right? So we don't eliminate the human, but we aid them in getting to what they need to do faster. All right, this is the same stuff we went over earlier, so I'm going to skip it. It's almost the exact same slide. And here's the sample use case. So some of the other use cases we went through are already here, but the one we're going to go through was monitoring the Iran and Israeli conflict. So the scenario is this: that we have an analyst that is tasked with monitoring social media discussions surrounding Iran-Israel conflict. We'll show how the analyst tracks the conflict, discovers potential threats, and then can dive, from the macro to the micro and perform a deeper analysis of the threat. So step one is data collection. So we can't do anything without data. So what we do is we identify keywords, we identify the sources we want. And these are just Booleans, you know, any of these words, all of these words, this type of stuff. And then we identify the languages we want to cover. You know, in addition to those right there, we also have traditional and modern Chinese, Mandarin, and Japanese, which will be out very shortly. Some of these you may not recognize, like Daum and Naver. Those are Korean news sites. And so we eliminate that data scraping. So we pull in from all the different targeted social media, and we can pull in from traditional media. We can even use email or network crawlers, any types of stuff you want, and you know, various different languages. And we pull in all that unstructured text and we start to make sense of it all. So the analyst has set up their keywords, they've hit go. And so now they're going to set up some automated reports, because they don't want to have to come back to this like every day and look at it. They just want to open their email. So this analyst is scheduling a report weekly to be emailed out on a regular basis in the form of a Word doc. And so we deliver this in Word doc, PDF, or JSON for compatibility. If you want to ingest it into another system, we're compatible with a number of systems. That's a requirement when you work with NATO. Like, we work very closely with the systems integrations at Carnegie Mellon. If any of you work with them. So let's see. Okay, so here's an example of how the analyst would start accessing their reports. So like, they can go in, they can see their snapshot history, they can download any of the reports, previous reports, new reports, and start looking through, you know, the different analysis that the computer showed. So next, data summarization. So this we saw a bit earlier when the AI is going through and saying, here's a summary of what we believe is going on. And this allows for, you know, a very quick way for the analyst to pick up and uncover potential problems, right? So what you see here, this is a real op. So this is declassified pieces of a real op. So what you're going to see is they picked up on this Natanz, and then on the right, you know, it says, you know, Israel believes that the Natanz blast set uranium enrichment capacity back 15 years, et cetera. And so the analyst wanted to start digging into this, like, you know, what are they saying online about this? So next, you know, once that comes up in their automated report, they say, okay, let's see what's going on and dive deep down into the issue. So they want to access the most relevant media posts, and they don't want to, you know, the computer determines the relevancy, and the analyst can set parameters around what they mean by relevant. But most of the time, 98% of the time, I would say, they just use what we have out of the box. And so what they use with this relevancy is they want to see what is the top shared content, like what is going viral, right? What are the top words? What are the top actors or other relevant data slices used by these, you know, visualizations online, et cetera. Again, this type of stuff is also used to produce copy inside if you're doing media campaigns. And I can talk more about that later, because that's how you do narrative shaping, like we saw earlier, because you can see the shape of what data is in the messages that are going viral and tailor your own messaging to follow that pattern, and it works. So here, you know, you can see Israeli military officials unite in opposition to Biden's Iran deal. So what is that? Why is that trending around Natanz? Why is Iran rattled as Israel repeatedly strikes key targets? So these are the links that are being shared online by the most right now that have something to do with this. So again, the analyst is going to go in, and you'll see here, they're going to see the timeline. They're going to come down. Here's some of the shared links. They want to look, and you can click on some of these, and then they see that it goes to the Jerusalem Post. That's an example of where that's shared. Here again, they're looking for the top hashtags. And so here it's going to present you with, the tweets, some of the most relevant tweets that are going around. So at this point, the analyst can go from the macro directly to the micro and see the types of media that are producing these outputs. So they can go right to it and say, this is what's driving this. So now let's look at discovering data anomalies. So here's where the computer is identifying various peaks of activity, of unusual activity in the timelines. And so when we compare peaks and troughs, you can see that the spikes in conversations, what's being driven there. And again, you can use these graphs just like we previously saw to go from the macro to the micro. And this really reduces your time to insight. This makes it a lot quicker when you don't have to go hunt this stuff down and the computer's pulling it out for you. So we've identified the abnormalities. And then we're going to go look at some anomaly posts again. So we can see here, the computer, go in, click on it. So I didn't see what he ticked, but you can pick most popular, you can pick, most relevant. And we're going to see what's driving these spikes. And, why is this going viral now? What's the type of media that's, making it do so? So again, this gives the analyst the ability to go quickly from the macro to the micro and get down to business. Whoops. All right, there. So again, this is all right. So the technology improvements, this is probably not relevant to this discussion, but I'm going to talk about it just briefly because you asked about it earlier about developing new tech. These automated summaries, this was a presentation given to various NATO organizations not too long ago. So again, we're always developing new ways for these summaries and this analysis to become better and to uncover potential problems before they escalate. Summarizations on who, what, or where. If the W5 is a very important part of intelligence tooling, and it says who said what, where, to whom, with what effect. So we can report on that, like who was it, what did they say, where did they say it, and then we can, use the rest of the tooling to see the effect. We're always doing speed processing because, sometimes you cast a wide net. Like if you would have taken, even today, if you go on and you just put the words Donald Trump in there, you're going to get a swath of information. But the idea is to reduce the analyst's busy work and eliminate any type of confirmation bias. And that's really important, because the confirmation bias has been a problem in the past. And by, building these algorithms to do it, we effectively remove that because we're removing the human from that piece of the loop. And then, so topic summarization, again, this is some of the tool doing it. So you can see there, they're pulling in these topics, the election, and this allows the analyst to go in and see if they want to dive into the tool along different timelines about why the computer decided to, or why the algorithm decided that this was a proper summary, and give some examples of, where it pulled information from. So it can, you can verify the computer's analysis of the topics inside the tooling. And that's it. That's a live example of somebody using our tool to tackle a certain situation. But again, we empower you to focus on tradecraft, thus shortening your time to insight. We allow you to rapidly gather data from a variety of sources, schedule and monitor threats with automatic triggering. We provide digestible insights to non-analysts. This is important, as that gap between how an analyst views things and how a non-analyst views things can be very broad sometimes. And we're always looking at new, state-of-the-art AI and machine learning techniques to make our work and tools better. And lastly, we're a discovery engine. We allow you to take unknown unknowns and turn them into known knowns, and discover disinformation narratives that are lurking around in the big data that are not quite on everybody's tongue yet, but they're going to be shortly, and you need to get ahead of those. So that is Nexalogy and NexaSMART and what we do. So I guess we have plenty, time for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Marshall. That's a fantastic tool, and I've had a pleasure to work with Zach. And it is fascinating. Every time I hear about Nexalogy, there is something new. So that is interesting to see how it has advanced and grown tremendously over time. We have some questions on the chat. I believe the first one from Shannon has been addressed. Then we have a question from Menuddin. He asks, can this application divide narratives based on the platform specifically?
Yes, absolutely. So we can cut the data almost any way you can think of. That's one of the strengths we have also, is the diversity of the platforms that we can address. So if you just wanted to focus on, say, Facebook, you can do that. If you want to focus on Twitter, you can do that. And then the computer and the AI will recalculate everything based on just those slices of data. It's not an issue. We can also cut it many other ways, not just platforms, but we can cut it by, different types of individuals, right? Actors, right? So do we want actors in just this one area, or do we want actors of just these origins, right? Or we can even cut it. And this is really interesting to the private sector, and they use this a lot. And I'll give you a quick example. We can actually cut it by what people are talking about, like what they're actually saying. And this is where the private sector comes in. They use us for ad-based targeting. So they use us for ad targeting. Cannabis sector uses us a lot. Motor companies use us a lot for this, but like the cannabis is real easy. They want to target medical cannabis. So they go out and look for people talking about back pain or opioids or things like that. And then they're looking to exclude like kids online going, hey, it's 420, let's go smoke a joint. Like, cause that's not the person they're trying to market their products to. So what this results in is they can craft a message and send it to people who are already talking about something interesting to them. So in a normal marketing campaign, you see about 1% click-through rate. We've seen click-through rates up to 17% on these. So it's very effective. It's also used by the RCMP for this. They call it the Be on the Lookout program. They'll use it to target for criminals they're looking for in an area. So they'll find all the people that are talking about crime and criminals, and then they'll send out a bolo to them and say, have you seen this person? And those people are more likely to share it in their circles. So yeah, that's one of our highlights, is the ability to do that and then to apply it in different situations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We don't have any questions on the chat, but I think we have some questions from the live audience. Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, so that's amazing work. It's amazing how many applications actually you presented. So I can see that this is extremely powerful. But I was curious myself, based on your experience, what do you think, or maybe I should say, what is your hypothesis in the case where actors who want to cause harm, either in a small scale or larger scale? You mentioned the case of similar situation like the 9/11. So based on your experience, what do you think is their motivation for sharing this information online? I mean, again, you presented like a bunch of different applications, so I can definitely see the motivation, for example, for individual sharing that the power grid is down, or anything, like any sort of infrastructure is down, like they're notifying each other, right? But in the case of an actor, any sort of actor who wants to cause harm, physical or cyber or any other, really, what do you find is their motivation for sharing these publicly?
Motivation is a hard piece to discover, like,
Mhm.
what hides in the hearts of men, right? I can say from the work we've done at a state level, so
Mhm.
like an actor as a state, you can see the results of what's being had, and the motivation is to fracture and divide. Now, let me give you some examples we've been involved in. Obviously, the recent presidential elections in the U.S., definitive state actor interference, definitive, the whole, I mean, it was very effective all throughout the 2010s. I mean, if you saw in 2014, before people were actually talking about this, it was already happening because, the Russian state was already serving up information. We can track it back as the Russians been doing this since the 50s, but we can track it back to social media all the way back to like about 2009, 2008.
Mhm.
Their motivation is to divide. It's to keep populations divided and to keep them from focusing on other goals. Russia was able to successfully annex Crimea, and nobody said boo because everybody was too busy with their infighting. And it's to exacerbate those problems. They don't really care about, I don't know, to give some US examples, they don't care about Black Lives Matter, right? They just don't. They don't care about Republicans or Democrats or any of this other stuff. What they care about is these people are at each other's throat. And, we saw this all over the place. Like there was the largest group online that was advocating for Texas to secede from the United States turned out to be a Russian-led op. So
I see.
it's divide and conquer. They do it in Canada too. Like we have a division, a different type of political division, but it runs along language politics in Quebec because the province of Quebec has special privileges that some of the other provinces don't have due to language politics between francophones and anglophones, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so there was a large Russian and Iranian, the Iran's in this too a lot of times, disinformation campaign around a pipeline that they wanted to build from Alberta out to the East Coast, and Quebec blocked it, right? Completely
Mhm.
blocked it, which this is called Energy East. You can look it up. And so
Mhm.
they started, on both sides of the fence, they started stoking, the Albertans, they started stoking the Quebecois, which are the people of Quebec. And it was just nasty for like 3 years. And it's the results linger today. I mean, we still hear people on the street talk about how horrible Alberta is, and people in Alberta talking about how horrible the Quebecers are. But I mean, we're all the same country. So at a state level, they're working on state goals. On an individual level, I mean, to be brutally honest, the people that do it individually are just trolling most of the time.
Mhm.
Because they're not, they don't have enough oomph to be effective.
Mhm.
Uh,
I see. So it looks to me that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
but yeah, the largest motivator is division and divisive politics. And you see that globally, right?
Mhm. Okay, yeah. So it seems to me that it's more about control and influence.
Yes,
Um,
it's an influence. This is most definitely an influence operation.
mhm.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
And well, they're good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I assume that you're cross analyzing the public social media information with other intelligence to um, come down to specific individuals, or is even that possible?
Yeah, it's absolutely it's absolutely able to trace it back to specific posts and specific individuals. And you saw some of that during the demo where we went from, I talked about going from the macro to the micro. So if you want to see
Right.
who's doing it, and we have, graphs you saw in the Trident Juncture, I put up one the one representation of the social media graph, all of those little blue dots and stuff you can dig into and even find down to the individual doing the tweeting or the posting or the, releasing the articles on media, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
I personally find, and I didn't show this in there, but there is because it's really complicated. And it takes an hour to go through the whole thing anyway, but I personally find we have tooling that allows us to track narratives online, like how they spread. And when we turn that tooling against, like, say, some sort of fake news or disinformation campaign, how that spreads and morphs over time. Because once the seed has been planted, it gets distorted. And this is the beauty of it, is when they write these posts or articles and things, it used to be just flat disinformation, but now it's designed. The Russians have a term for this before I get it. They actually have coined the term. They call people that do this useful idiots.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
So the Russians call people that do the spreading for them useful idiots. That's no joke.
Oh,
You can look that up. That's what they call them. And these are the people that just regurgitate whatever comes online, or they reframe it. And they have built into the messaging just enough to where people actually reframe it in terms of their politics or their religion or whatever point they're trying to make, right? That it becomes even more difficult to track that narrative, but it still has the same effect. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
That's the technique that's emerged over the past couple of years that's been the hardest to deal with.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, we
And I
could all
guess,
learn from these guys.
yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned this a little bit, that there is also the path to defense. I think you implied it or kind of said something like this, but I'm not sure that you're also having the technology to play the role of a defender, so to speak, so that you can limit the damage that a misinformation spread or any sort of influence spread can cause.
Well, we can assist in that. Now, it's not automated or anything like that, but the platform, a lot of the tooling is built around a certain protocol called BEND, like BEND. This is the narrative and the protocol that's in use by NATO. It stands for build, engage, neutralize, distract. No, we do sit on a NATO working group with participants from 22 other countries around disinformation and combating it. But NATO has determined, and rightfully so, that, once something gets online, you can't do anything about it. 10 years ago, people were trying to scrub stuff off the internet. You just can't do it. Once it's out there, it's out there, especially with the penetration we all have now, where everybody who's got a smartphone is now a publisher of information, right?
Right.
So everybody has a voice and a platform. So the idea behind it is, well, what can we do to build and engage our narrative and neutralize and distract from their narrative, right? And so how do you get your message to be the one people are listening to and not the other guy?
Right.
So yeah, we have built a lot of our tooling around that protocol. And so we can be a part of the puzzle, right? We're not the complete puzzle, but we're a part of it, and we'll allow analysts and, other people, the tooling, if they want to engage in that type of behavior, they can. And it's also like I said, in the private sector, it's a very effective protocol for ad marketing. Turns out. So that's what Samsung, you'll see them on our list of clients. They do a lot of ad marketing, and they monitor their employees, all their employees' email through our system, and they use it to, figure out if one particular group is having a hard time or one group's doing well, things like that.
Oh, wow. Tons of applications.
Yeah. And like right now, some of our engines are I mentioned Latte Corporation. They own 7-Eleven in
Mhm.
Asia, and they're developing an entirely automated, um, how do you say in English? Corner store, right?
Oh,
Like a 7-Eleven. And so they use our engine for NLP purposes.
mhm.
You go in, you talk to the desk, the computer at the desk, tell it what you want, you pay, and then there's a little hole in the wall where a conveyor belt pushes it out. It's pretty cool.
Oh,
So
awesome.
anyway,
Thank you so much for answering my questions.
yeah, no problem.
Interesting. Thank you, Marshall. I had a quick question, and perhaps if there is time, I can ask my second question also. In the studies that we have conducted for Canadian election, and I believe Zach was also looking in some of the work that we had done on YouTube and disinformation campaigns during Canadian 2019 prime ministerial elections. There was a strange thing that had happened to us, and rather more recently, where media group, and I will not name the group, I'll just say that their first word is rebel. They had started harassing us, and I think from your laughter, I think
I
you
know
know
who
the
they
whole
are.
story. All right, good. So my question was, have you run into pushback from such groups who have espoused some of the disinformation beliefs or the conspiracy theories that
Oh
you
yeah.
identified or you have helped identify? And then further, if that has happened, then how do you protect yourself and your staff or researchers?
Well, we've run into them at a corporate level. Okay. They've never gone after our staff directly, but the same group that you're talking about is taking pot shots at us. Because if we ever name them in a piece, and we have several times, they get bent out of shape. So I guess this would be the equivalent in the U.S. of what's that guy's name? Alex Jones.
Yeah. Yeah, that name comes to mind. Yeah. After
Yeah,
looking at
yeah,
what's
they're
going on there.
very similar in the way they operate. But yeah, so no, we've never had a problem with it. I think one of the reasons we don't have a problem with it is a lot of times when we're naming this stuff,
Mm.
I mean, it's co-branded by, say, Defense Research or the RCMP. And if I don't think they want to take those entities on, quite honestly.
It may be that their operations are evolving, because
Yeah.
for our study that was published by Royal Canadian Forces early or late last year,
Yeah.
what they did was they basically started harassing us with FOIA requests first, and then started harassing Office of Naval Research, National Science Foundation, and other funding agencies who have supported that work through FOIA request. But of course, that is Canadian group, so they cannot technically do a FOIA request for a US entity. So they hired local Little Rock-based companies. That's where I am. So they hired Little Rock-based companies to do those FOIA requests. And then they didn't stop it there, because we answered those FOIA requests. They started sending out harassing emails to me and some of the other program officers who were acknowledged on the grant, so acknowledged on the paper. So that's what I was wondering. So you haven't had such
Well,
encounters?
I personally have, but as the CEO of a publicly traded company, I get harassed daily. So, I mean,
Especially the type of work that you're doing with
yeah, I mean,
NATO and Russia and so on.
yeah, I honestly, I personally ignore it. As far as the company is concerned, yes, we've been harassed. We've actually been named, and they've published articles trying to disparage our work, and to mar our name. And those articles have come out both in the U.S., Canada. There was a couple that were published in Germany, as we're doing work over there. And what we've done in the past, when those come out, is to just go on and address it directly. Like sometimes we've even put it on our blog. Like we did that at one point. There was a Montreal journalist that, well, I was told, and I can't prove it, that she was paid to, basically disparage Nexalogy's name And so, she put out a bunch of disparaging articles. So we just posted them directly on the website and answered it line by line with facts and said, look, this is definitively not true. Here it is. Bang, bang, bang. And generally, when, our research is very heavily authenticated. So we rely on that and to make sure that, we're in the right before we go ahead. See what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's one of the ways, probably the primary way that we defend ourselves against anything like that comes up is we're not talking about opinions here. We're talking about facts and truth. And here it is.
Yeah,
So,
and there's no point arguing with them because they're not going to
No.
debate on the argument or the rational or the logical facts. So
No.
yeah, they've gone on to the extent that they had started sending emails to my colleagues, saying that the research that comes out of this group is biased and this is not fair. And so they try to disparage your name or the work that you're doing, even though this was a highly reviewed publication and published by Royal Canadian Forces, went through the standard 3 review rounds and all of that. So it was an interesting experience from that.
Well, unfortunately, we are in a climate today where, disinformation and, truth is questioned on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And it's just something you got to live with at the moment until, I guess the world gets past their own truth and we can again go back to fact-based talk. So,
yeah. Well, I know that we have shot our regular time, so I'm sure we have folks dropping out. And thank you again, Marshall, for this fantastic talk. And you have shared the link, so that link will also be shared with all the working group participants. Yeah, thanks to you and to the participants who joined the call. And I look forward to seeing you next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone.